I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: should schools teach kids about Jesus at Christmas time? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because of the following article which made its way into the New Zealand media over the weekend. Taking Christ out of Christmas, mum keeps son out of school to avoid nativity classes. A mother kept her 7-year-old son home from school this week to avoid lessons about the Christian origins of Christmas. The mother said she was unhappy her son's class was being asked to act out the nativity and discussions about Jesus, Mary and Joseph. So on Wednesday, her son stayed home from school. The mother had no problem with Christmas activities in general, but she said, but making them biblical was out of line for a secular school. Well, if you've got no problem with Christmas activities in general, then at some point you're probably going to want to talk about the origins of why we have Christmas, and the reason we have Christmas is because of religion. It's Christianity that is the source of Christmas, the birth of Jesus in particular. Her son didn't want to join the activities because he didn't believe in God, but he was upset by the only other alternative, going to another classroom. The Secular Education Network applauded the mother's stand. The mother said the saga started when her son had a schoolyard debate about who Christmas presents came from, Santa or his parents. He came home upset after a teacher told him off, she said. In a letter to the principal, she said it was awfully hypocritical for her son to be told to keep his beliefs to himself, only for the school to offer a forum for Christian students to discuss their beliefs about Christmas. So it kind of sounds like he was playing the part of the Christmas Grinch a little bit in the playground and upsetting a few kids by saying, nah, there's no such thing as Santa Claus. And I can imagine possibly in some new atheist households, they tend to have that religious fervour about these sorts of things. No, we're not going to teach kids about fairy tales. There's going to be no mythology in our house. We're going to have a big photo of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and we're going to put presents under it, and then we're going to worship it on December the 25th. Neil, teach us how to be good people. No, obviously I'm going too far there, but I'm guessing that possibly that's what's happened here. It doesn't say explicitly, but I'm assuming that's what it was. While it is absolutely fine for children to hold their own discussions on Santa and religion in the playground, it should not be teacher-led within the classroom, the mother wrote. The mother said teaching religion in a historical sense was fine. Well, that's exactly what you do at Christmas time, or can do at Christmas time. That's the historical context to Christmas. Jesus, the birth of Jesus, Christianity. That's why we have Christmas. But I don't think that would include biblical reenactments or encouraging students to talk about their own beliefs. That's really, really bad. Lisa Reynolds from the Secular Education Network said it would be almost impossible to reenact the nativity scene in a secular way. Individual teachers have to be very, very careful about how they teach these sorts of subjects, she said. And I can just imagine someone trying to reenact a secular nativity with a new atheist in the corner there, probably like a Monty Python skit. That didn't happen. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. That's probably how that would go, I would imagine. The school principal said the school was looking into the concerns raised. The intention of this team of learners has been teaching traditional stories, myths and legends across the term, he said. So there's some interesting context. This is taking place in a much broader learning experience. These kids are having their horizons broadened, and you have to talk about the source material if you're going to teach people about Christmas and Christmas Day and why we celebrate Christmas. You have to go to the source material, which is the Christian scriptures. That's where you have to go. So this absurd idea that you couldn't have this sort of stuff happening and yet you could somehow teach a secular version of Christmas is just nonsense. But there's a really important point here. We should be teaching our kids about this stuff. Why? Because this is part of our patrimony, our heritage. This is who we are in the West. So much of who we are in the West was shaped by Christianity. Not by Islam, not by Buddhism, but by Christianity. And in fact, Christianity is so important to our history, our patrimony, our cultural heritage, to who we actually are in the West, even if a lot of people today have lost sight of that heritage, It's so important that we actually have ring-fenced the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, Christmas Day, or that date as the commemoration of his birth, as a public holiday, and we have been doing that for a very, 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 very long time. So, we have a holiday that happens every year and has been happening for a very, 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 very long time in our society. In fact, since before the beginning of the birth of New Zealand society, but right there from the very beginning, is this holiday, December the 25th, and we don't want to teach our kids about why that holiday exists. I'm assuming that this mum and her family and their kids, they're not going to go to school on the 25th, and they're not going to go to work. They're actually going to take the holiday, aren't they? Well, then shouldn't you actually be teaching your kids about why this holiday exists? What could possibly be the problem here? The kids weren't being asked to bow down and kiss a crucifix of Jesus, or to pledge their allegiance to Christianity, or to actually to pray. They were having a discussion. They were acting out the nativity, which is the source material. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, whether you think it's myth or reality, that's the source. And the source of that is the shaping of so much we take for granted now in the West. Christianity, this guy here, Jesus. Like, if I was living in a Buddhist culture and my kids were there and they were going to school, and every year in this Buddhist culture they had a national holiday to celebrate the birthday of Buddha, I would have no problem at all with my kids understanding why that national holiday existed within that culture. Why? Because it would be broadening their horizon. I'd have a problem if the school wanted them to start making Buddhist venerations or praying prayers in that religious tradition, because that's not our tradition. But I'd have no problem with the school acting out the source documents and the stories and everything else and having discussions about what they believe, etc., etc. No problem whatsoever. To me, this is basic education. One of my favourite quotes comes from a guy called Gustav Mahler, and he said this once: "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, it is the preservation of fire." And that's what's being handed on to these kids here in this primary school. An important tradition that is fundamental in shaping the society in which they live. This is actually good education. I mean, there's so much more that could be done, but this is just pretty basic sort of stuff. But sadly nowadays, a lot of that patrimony, a lot of that heritage has just been stripped out of education. And a lot of it is now very dumbed down. But this is actually an example of giving kids an understanding and an awareness and an education about the context of the society in which they live. And it's really important to do this, obviously for their own formation, but also because it attaches them to tradition. It gives them that important sense of the traditions that are part of shaping them and the society in which they live, even if they don't realize that those traditions are part of the shaping mechanism. Here's the irony in all of this. A couple of weeks ago, there was an article in the New Zealand media, and a big sort of controversy broke out around the fact that a group of senior students, so year 13 students, the final year of high school, 17-year-olds, maybe one or two 18-year-olds as well, were asked in an exam to explain a quote that had the word trivial in it. And they didn't know what the word trivial meant, and so they complained about it publicly. It made its way into the media, and there were even some people, adults in the education sector, defending the fact that these year 13 students didn't know what the word trivial actually meant. Well, I would suggest that perhaps these two events are a lot more connected than we would like to think. The fact is that if we're not going to give a good breadth and depth of education to our students, and we're only going to try and teach them some sort of very dry, mechanistic facts about certain things, but we're not going to give them the full spectrum of history, the context, the cultures, and everything that sort of gives rise, the traditions and everything else that goes along with it, then we are handicapping our kids. We're cutting them off at the knees. And we're effectively leaving them in a position where this whole rich heritage, how to think critically, how to think well, how to understand who you actually are at this moment in history. This moment in history is not a detached moment in history. You have been shaped and formed, and the societies in which you live are shaped and formed by the events that come before. And this is why this sort of stuff is just so fundamentally important. And you're taking a holiday on the 25th of December. If you want the holiday, maybe it could be okay to actually teach kids about why the holiday exists. What's the problem there? To me, this is an example of where certain new atheists, and please note, I didn't say all atheists, because I've got friends who are atheists who don't buy into this sort of weird religious fervour, they can actually become the very thing that they so loudly and vocally criticise: religious fundamentalists. They become so narrow and so dogmatic in their beliefs about the role of religion that they take on the role of a religious fundamentalist and the demands that they make. And I'm sorry, but this isn't helping our kids. Whether we like it or not, if you live in the West, this is our heritage. This is part of who we are. It is an event that is responsible for shaping the society in which we live. It's actually a very, very important and pivotal event. So it's in our best interest to understand it. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Subscribestar or on Patreon. There is a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.